Well, clearly it is a bright, red, sunny morning in America. It's been 2 days since that election landslide, that Republican tsunami, and a stunning comeback by Donald Trump, the 45th president. He will now go on to become the 47th president of the United States. I think it fundamentally alters America's politics, Anand, because I think for the first time since Ronald Reagan, you have a mainstream Republican politician who has created his own social coalition. Trump's victory, and he's swept all 7 states, he's won the popular vote at last count by over 5 million votes or so. His victory in its depth, in its breadth, in its spread is absolutely phenomenal. It can only be compared to the 1984 victory of Ronald Reagan. Of course, in Electoral College numbers terms, it would be a little less. But then the fact is that he's put together for the first time since Ronald Reagan a social coalition that includes not just white working class people, but Hispanic working class people, African American working class people, young people. We talked a lot about the Gen Z vote. A lot of the young male voters seem to have gone for Donald Trump. But on the show tonight, we will be talking not so much about what it means for America domestically. We will be talking about what a second Trump term might mean for the rest of the world. Of course, Trump will have an expansive domestic agenda, but he's also going to alter the geopolitical world order as we know it. And we're going to divide this up in 3 parts. There is places in the world, global capitals tonight, where there is a great sense of elation, joy, Delhi being one of them, Tel Aviv being the other. Already we know that Prime Minister Modi and President-elect Trump have spoken on the phone. President-elect Trump has referred to Prime Minister Modi and India as a great friend of America. So you can expect the India-US partnership, certainly in the defense sector, in the energy sector, in the critical areas sector, in security, when it comes to Indo-Pacific, all of those areas, it is going to widen, it is going to deepen. Maybe on the trade part, we might have some hiccups, there might be some issues of tariffs up and down, but we will talk about that. There are also places in the world tonight where there is a great degree of anxiety. There's a great degree of trepidation about what a Trump second term might mean for them. In Kiev, for example, they are worried that Trump might force Ukraine to accept a surrender deal or a peace plan where it has to give up 20% of its territory. So there is a great degree of trepidation in Kiev right now. In most European capitals, in London, in Paris, in Berlin, they don't know whether Trump will follow through on his promise of withdrawing from NATO if Europe does not keep its end of commitments to European security and transatlantic security. And then, of course, there are also places where there is a degree of caution. We don't know how the Trump second term is going to play out. In Beijing, for example, Trump has been talking about universal tariffs to the extent of 60% on goods that are coming in from China. So on tonight's show, we'll try and divide this up. We'll talk about how a Trump second term might fundamentally alter the existing world order in a way that we haven't seen since the end of the Cold War.
America great again. Oh, and powerful mandate. But we had no wars. They said, he will start a war. I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars. You know, we had no wars. 4 years, we had no wars.
हमारी बैठक ऐसे समय हो रही है जब विश्व तनावों और संघर्षों से घिरा हुआ है। ऐसे में साझा डेमोक्रेटिक वैल्यूज के आधार पर क्वाड का मिलकर साथ चलना पूरी मानवता के लिए बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण है।
All right, let's open this up to a full panel of foreign policy experts. Ambassador Harshvardhan Shringla is former Foreign Secretary to the Government of India. Ambassador Timothy Roma is former US Ambassador to India. Lisa Curtis is Deputy Assistant to the President and NSC Senior Director for South and Central Asia. And Cynthia Farhad is an expert from the Middle East. She writes about Middle East counterterrorism and, of course, counterintelligence ops. So welcome, everyone. Let me start with Ambassador Tim Roma. Trump has been consistently talking about ending the wars. He's been talking about ending the war in Ukraine. He said it on the campaign trail that he would do it in 24 hours. He's also talked about ending the war with between Israel and Hamas, although he has said that he felt that Israel has to finish the job. What might a Trump 2.0 term mean for these two ongoing wars? How is he going to sort of end these two wars? Because willy-nilly, directly or indirectly, this was also a big talking point for Americans when they voted in the 2024 election.
Well, nice to be with you again, and nice to be with the panelists on your show. And I thought you did an excellent job outlining how the world is looking at the next Trump presidency, some with elation, some with trepidation, some with both. I think in the Middle East, there are very, very common strategic interests between the United States of America and India in particular. Both are strong supporters of Israel. Both want a two-state solution and a long-term recognition of the Palestinian people. And both want a new kind of strategic regional partnership in the area that combines a normalization of relations with the Saudis, an expansion of the Abraham Accords, and more economic trade in the area. India has been doing that for several years with their diaspora, 9 million people up in the Middle East. India has been reaching out economically to the UAE and other countries to expand their trade. They have an economic corridor they'd like to build there. So both of our countries have some strong common interest in the strategic partnership and peace in that area. And I think India could play a very important role going forward. When I was ambassador in Delhi, we were able to work with India on getting India more involved in peacekeeping and economic investment in Afghanistan. They have this experience. They made $2 billion in commitment in Afghanistan. They could do a lot to continue to get involved in de-escalating the process in the Middle East and potentially helping to rebuild Gaza at some point. In Ukraine, we have some very different strategic issues and problems. We have Ukraine's sovereignty and freedom and the courage of their people fighting for those things. We have Mr. Modi saying he'd like to play a peace role. Whether or not he can do that with Putin at this point, we don't know. And we have NATO very interested in their borders there and Putin's aggression and peace long-term there. So we want to make sure that the Ukrainian people are not sacrificed there. They get a fair, peaceful resolution, and they get back their land. And so that is a very different outcome and set of problems. Finally, I'd just like to end on a lot of this depends upon Mr. Trump, who he puts into key positions at Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. It's not just what you want to do in government, as Ambassador Shringla knows so well. It's how you achieve these things. It's how you pressure the levels of government and how you work diplomatically in the world to achieve your strategic goals.
I also want to go across to Ambassador Shringla. So, if you were to look at from India's vantage point of view, you have the IMEC, which India has been talking about, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor. But for that to happen, you need the war to end. And what Ambassador Roma was saying, that Trump might go back to the Abraham Accords because Trump was the architect of the Abraham Accords. It was signed when Trump was president. And then you look at towards the east on the Indo-Pacific, again, it converges with India's interests because even though Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, the late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan, was the original architect of Quad, Trump was the one who pushed all four countries to eventually get it up to the summit level. Of course, the first summit happened when Biden became president in 2020, But ultimately, of course, in 2021 was when the first summit happened. So when you look at it from India's vantage, both on the IMEC corridor and on the Indo-Pacific corridor, do you see interests converging with the Trump administration, or Trump 2.0 term?
Well, Zakka, let's try and break it down from the point of view of, where I am from. That's New Delhi's point of view. We would like to see an end to the conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, as much as the global South would like to see that. We also want a renewed focus on the Indo-Pacific. We believe that the conflicts that are ongoing in Europe and the Middle East is distracting attention away from what is important, which is the Indo-Pacific. And I think it fits in very well with President Trump's own vision of trying to end the conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, and of course his focus on the Indo-Pacific. So from that perspective, you see what Prime Minister Modi said. He said, let us work together for global security and prosperity and stability, of course. So from his perspective, I think he is looking at how we can reinforce the efforts that the United States will undertake under a Trump presidency. Keep in mind, of course, that today the world is in a state of flux. There's a lot of concern all around in the way things are going. It's as though there is no control over regional conflicts, over smaller conflicts. There's been more military conflicts today than you ever had since the end of the Cold War. But who's going to put an end to this? It's not the UN Security Council for sure. So obviously you look to the United States, and the United States has taken the lead in the past. And you believe a strong leader like Trump, who has an unfettered mandate. And of course, I fully agree with Ambassador Romer when he talks about the fact that he needs the right people in place as well to be able to implement that. So bringing about a ceasefire, bringing about I would not say a solution to the Ukraine issue, but at least a ceasefire that will allow both sides to go back to things that are important. Reconstruction of Ukraine is a very important issue. I think there is fatigue all around. Contrary to what is the expectation, I think both sides are quite happy to see some sort of end to the conflict, because you're reaching a sort of point where you can't continue, the slugfest. At the same time, the Middle East is more complicated, as we all know, but we are invested heavily there. We have the I2U2, we have the India-Europe-Middle East corridor. These are huge and ambitious projects to support the Abraham Accord, to support the vision that Trump outlined in his first term. And I think we are ready to take that forward.
I'll come to the Ukraine question in a moment, but Lisa Curtis, what Ambassador Shringla said in the initial part, a lot of Indian diplomats have been saying this privately and even publicly, that, the focus for the US foreign policy has to be on its great power competition or rivalry with China. That's what is going to decide the next 30 years. It's not US-Russia or it's not US-Iran. The big picture is China. And the feeling in South Bloc was certainly that because of these wars, Russia, Ukraine, as well as what's happening in the Middle East, that the US leadership and the Biden-Harris administration was completely bogged down, and they took the eye off the ball. And the ball is US-China great power competition. What happens in the Indo-Pacific, where, of course, India is a huge stakeholder. So is Japan, so is South Korea, so are all of Southeast Asian countries.
Well, I think that what we have to remember is that what happens in Europe and Russia-Ukraine war will have an impact on what happens in the Indo-Pacific. The two theaters are interrelated. We simply can't escape that. And the argument that President-elect Trump made in his debate with Kamala Harris a couple months ago was that because of the disastrous U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and how that was, handled so poorly, made the U.S. look weak on the international stage and actually emboldened Russia to invade Ukraine several months later. So, by that logic, it stands to reason that the way in which the Ukraine-Russia war would end matters. It matters whether Putin is rewarded for his territorial aggression against Ukraine. it matters whether the way the war ends between Russia and Ukraine, what impact that will have on other U.S. adversaries, other countries who may want to exercise territorial aggression against their own neighbors. So these things have impacts on each other, and I think that's something that we have to remember. And, we have to ensure that Putin would never do this again, that he wouldn't choose to do this again in 2 to 3 years. So, it's easy to say we want wars to end. Of course we do. We don't want to see this conflict, but it matters how it ends, because that will have an impact in other parts of the
Lisa,
world.
if I may,
it will have an impact on U.S. global leadership and the
I may,
perception of U.S. global leadership.
Let me ask you, if Trump comes into office and he says to Zelensky that, look, this is the peace deal on offer, you accept the terms where right now, as it exists, I think Russia controls about 20% of Ukrainian territory from before when the war started. So you give up that territory, in lieu of which you get security guarantees, or you even get NATO membership. If that was on the table, otherwise, Trump says to Zelensky, I'm cutting off all American funding and all American weapons coming into Ukraine. What choice do you think Zelensky has other than to accept?
Well, I think it's true that Ukraine does rely on U.S. assistance, and so that it has to be factored in. But again, I would come back to the way that war ends will have an impact on perceptions of U.S. global leadership moving forward. It will have an impact on other U.S. adversaries and how they choose to act moving forward. So it's very important that however it ends, that the global order and respect for that global order and respect for the sovereignty and independence of nations is stronger. Because otherwise, then I think we face the same phenomenon that Biden faced when he withdrew in that disastrous manner from Afghanistan 3 years ago.
Let me go to Cynthia Farahat, because obviously the Middle East is also a key region. The war there has been going on for over a year now. In fact, one of the reasons many say, at least even domestically here in the US, the reason why Arab Americans did not support the Democrats, did not support Kamala Harris, is because they felt that they were giving too much of a long rope to Prime Minister Netanyahu. Prime Minister Netanyahu, again, has spoken to President-elect Donald Trump, one of the few world leaders, along with Prime Minister Modi, to have spoken to President-elect Donald Trump. How do you see President-elect Donald Trump try to end that war? Of course, he has said on the campaign trail he thinks that Israel's not finished the job. It needs to finish the job. But do you also see him telling Netanyahu, okay, go and finish the job, do whatever you need to do, but you have to do it within a time frame. It can't be these endless wars. And to be fair, I mean, Trump has always been an anti-war candidate. He opposed the Iraq War. He opposed America's involvement in Afghanistan. And of course, he is opposed to the Russia-Ukraine war. He's made no bones about it. But on the Israel question, he has said, yes, Israel needs to finish the job. But do you see him telling Netanyahu that, look, you have a 3-month window or a 6-month window, you need to go in there, finish the job, and then let's get back to what we were doing in my first term, which is normalization of ties between Saudi Arabia, Israel, UAE, Israel, Bahrain, Israel, and the rest of the Arab world and Israel?
Thank you so much for having me, and I apologize about my tech issues. I just moved and I still haven't set up my office, but thank you so much for having me. I agree with what everybody said on your wonderful panel, and yes, I definitely see that President Trump is going to, in some matter, put an end to this war. And it's not just up to Israel, but it's also up to its adversaries to stop the attacks so Israel can stop retaliating. We can't tell Israel, stop retaliating and get murdered and let your people get murdered at the same time. And that is President Trump's strength. In 2 weeks, President Trump eradicated Islamic State. I would like to remind Mullah Baradar with his meeting with President Trump in 2020, when President Trump told them that he is going to end the Taliban if one American citizen gets killed. And the peace through strength strategy that he very strongly held himself in his first term, I think that is going to resonate with the enemies of the United States, the enemies of India, the enemies of Israel, and not only President Trump will reestablish the Abraham Accords. I do not believe at all October 7th would have taken place without the criminally negligent evacuation of Afghanistan. That returned Afghanistan to pre-9/11 situation, but on steroids. I do not think we would have had this war without the empowerment of the Taliban through the office in Qatar. So I would be very worried if I was the Taliban, if I was Al-Qaeda and their handlers in Qatar and China and Russia.
Okay, let me go back to Ambassador Roma. I just want to talk for 1 second about Russia-Ukraine, because Lisa was very clear that, America can't be seen as conceding or forcing Ukraine to cede territory to Russia in order to get a peace deal. Yes, everybody agrees that the war needs to end. It's going to be 3 years in February. That's just a couple of months away. It'll be a month after President Trump gets back into office after Inauguration Day. So the war definitely needs to end. Do you foresee a situation if Trump says, take the deal or I'm cutting funding, then Europe steps up to it, that Paris and Berlin and London step up to it and tell Zelensky and tell Ukraine that, look, we view this conflict very differently from how Trump views it. This, for us in Europe, is existential, and therefore, if America is cutting funding, then so be it. We will step up to the plate.
Well, once again, in a bipartisan way, I agree with most of what Lisa Curtis said about ending wars. They're very difficult. And for great powers, how we get out of wars and how we partner with other countries and how we share strategic interests are critically important to both kinetic power and soft power that we have in the world. Now, Trump tried to end the Afghan war for 4 years in his first term. He couldn't do it. He didn't do it. He promised to do it. It's very tough to do that. So Ukraine is going to be difficult to end that in a way that the NATO partners are happy, that the European Parliament agrees to, that Zelensky agrees to. And quite frankly, the lesson for Putin, and Lisa remembers this, Putin didn't invade Ukraine one time in the Biden administration. He did it in 2014 in Crimea. So he's done it twice. And we don't want this to be a precedent. We don't want China to learn from this, that they can invade across India's border. We don't want China to believe that they can push the Philippines around on mineral rights and fishing rights and energy rights. That is not something that should be done around the world. And great powers like the United States, we are in a position that we have to take stands, whether it be the Middle East, whether it be Ukraine, whether it be the Philippines, whether it be supporting our friends in India and backing them on that China incursion across India's border, that great powers get involved in these situations. And they don't always look pretty and they don't always turn out perfectly. And I agree that we need to make sure that the United States gets back to a lot of its priorities in the Indo-Pacific, partnering with India to grow our strategic relationship. Can we expand the AUKUS agreement and find ways to do new things with India on quantum computing, undersea cables, AI? Can we deepen and expand the Quad in more areas with India to look for regional security for India and its neighbors and prosperity and growth? These are all areas that I think Democrats and Republicans in this new Congress want to work with India on. The great news is both Democrats and Republicans want a better relationship and a deeper relationship with India moving forward.
I do want to ask Ambassador Shringla, one of the things that we haven't touched upon is the business of tariffs. And Trump is a great believer that somehow you put tariffs, it will make trade a little more balanced and it'll get manufacturing jobs back into America. that of course is a big part of his constituency that has now voted for him twice in the industrial Midwest, or what once used to be the industrial Midwest. It's today called the Rust Belt. He has made these promises of getting these jobs back, and he's talking about 60% tariffs on imports from China. Do you think that is possible, or is it just for campaign purposes that he has said that, and he might have to tone down while he's in the White House? And secondly, if he were to even implement half of that, how may that change the trading relationship in the world?
So just a brief word to say that I agree with much of what has been said, and I think fully with Master Roma when he talked about working together on technology, working together for the Quad, expanding the remits of some of these groupings. I just want to only point out that the question of China invading India does not arise, and I don't think that our defense capabilities will allow them to even think of that possibility. You can have border skirmishes, you can have minor transgressions on a line of actual control that is not yet demarcated, but invasion, I think, is a concept that is passé. But having said that, let's come down to the question of tariffs. I personally feel that if you look at Trump 1.0, he imposed 25% tariffs on $360 billion of Chinese exports to the United States. At that time, it was a huge figure, and I think there was a lot of trepidation that it would impact very adversely on the pricing of various products and that inflation would go up. But the fact of the matter is that we are talking about 5 or 6 years down the line, and even the Biden administration did not change those tariffs. If anything, they increased tariffs on certain Chinese products and also ring-fenced certain areas like high technology, semiconductors, etc. But definitely, I mean, the fact that whether Trump can do this or not is not a question, because he can do it. He's got control of the Senate, possibly the House, so there's nothing stopping him from doing it. The issue is, what are the implications? I mean, you can do 25%, but I think 60% will definitely impact on the cost of living of people in the United States. I'm not talking about Chinese exports only. I'm talking about exports from any other country. And certainly high tariffs, as you raise tariffs, there is a certain, I would say, a proportional cost that has to be borne, on account of that. But he's also talking about taking those,
consumer,
taking that extra revenue that is earned through higher tariffs and using it for the benefit of people. So I don't know where the trade-off is, but nothing stops him from doing it. Yeah.
One of the things is that if you ask ordinary people why they voted out the Biden-Harris administration, or at least did not give Kamala Harris a chance at the White House, the number one issue is the economy. The number one issue is the price of groceries, inflation. So when Trump says, I'm going to put 60% tariffs, clearly, when it's private companies, they're not going to just take those tariffs. They're going to transfer those tariffs ultimately to the consumer. Whether or not that will lead to further inflation, and how that might play with an electorate that has voted Trump in, thinking that he will bring down the price of groceries, that is still an open question. I'll give the final word to Lisa Curtis before we go into a package story about how this has advantaged Trump in terms of whatever foreign policy agenda he wants to carry out. Very quickly, Lisa Curtis, what do you see as Trump's priority areas when it comes to foreign policy? They say a second term for a US president is always about history, about legacy. What would he want to leave behind and be remembered as, at least in the foreign policy realm?
Well, I think he will focus on trying to wind down the current wars in Ukraine as well as the Middle East. And he will want to try to encourage negotiations elsewhere in other hotspots, whether it's with North Korea. I think he will, try trade negotiations with China, even as he, potentially imposes more tariffs on Chinese goods. But I think he really is somebody who does not like conflict. He values negotiations. He sees himself as a good negotiator. I think he's correct in that. And so I think he will want to be remembered as a president who prevailed over a period of, peace and prosperity throughout the globe. And, whether he can achieve that, we've yet to see. But I think that would be one of his major goals.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Ambassador Roma, Ambassador Shringla, Lisa Curtis, and Cynthia for joining us. I keep going back to, what happened 40 years ago when a similar Republican president back then, Ronald Reagan, stood at the Brandenburg Gate and said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. That eventually led to the end of the Cold War, and for the last 40 years, we have had what is the post-Cold War era. And I suspect, I'm not one who indulges too much in hyperbole or adjectives, but I suspect we're going to see in the Trump second term the beginning of a reordering of that post-Cold War era. In what form or shape it takes, I don't know, but we'll certainly be here as observers, as journalists, to try and document that. Thank you very much to all our guests for joining us.